All right. Well, one last discussion here, and it focuses around the question of bias. And when we say biased, it can carry a couple different meanings. They can. One meaning is that it's skewed against one population over another. In other words, the items that are used, population, let me get this out while I'm thinking about it, over another. And so the items that we choose, for example, in most intelligence tests, presume a certain exposure to culture, to education, etc. And some would suggest that this bias is a unfair advantage to white Caucasian students over black students, and that's a very real possibility. It has had a variety of. As I was saying, you heard the phone, and that was interfering here. But as I was saying, it has had a variety of impact on various populations, to the point where some of these tests have actually been altered to have items that are relevant to a particular culture. And that's one of the issues when we come to bias. The other one is they're biased in the sense that they are sensitive to performance differences. And we would expect that. Actually, a well-designed test would hopefully pick up performance differences between the people that it's testing. Excuse me. So, and that is related to sometimes, well, a lot of times it's related to cultural experience. The tests themselves are not biased in that they predict as accurately for one group as they do for another, and that goes to the number one up here, because they're not biased in the sense that they're not skewing the results in favor of one over another. They predict accurately for one group just as much as they do for another. And the issue here for one group over another. The issue here is how people see these tests, and if there is a hidden malicious motivation underneath these tests that understandably a lot of African Americans feel as if the system, the institution, is pitted against them, and this is just one more example of that. The predictive validity is about the same for men as it is for women, the same for blacks as it is for whites, for rich versus poor. Those are all examples of it predicts accurately for one group over another. The other big concept is this idea of stereotype threat. And essentially, this boils down to how people see themselves. It's a self-confirming, self-fulfilling, if you want to put it that way, self-confirming assumption that someone has. So just to give you an example, if I feel like I just can't get math, I don't like math, I don't do very well at it, and then I get a test and I do really well at it, what do I tend to say? Well, I was lucky. If I do really poorly at it, I say, see, I told you, I can't do math. And the same thing is true for girls in terms of how they see themselves with math. If they're in just a group of girls versus in a group of guys and girls, this tends to trigger and their scores end up being lower. The phenomenon a lot of times shows up in intelligence testing as well. And so one way to boil it all down is a self-fulfilling prophecy. In other words, I predict that I will do poorly, and that prediction influences my outcome on a particular test. And I can tell you from having given these tests, particularly ones that are individually administered, and that means that I'm with a kid, a child, a little one, and I'm giving this test, and that's the interaction between the two of us. They tend to do better than in a group setting where we are already making conclusions about ourselves with the people that are also in that group, and we can say, oh, I'm doomed. Look at all these smart people in the room with me. I'm not going to do very well, and lo and behold, anxiety skyrockets, and the person is concluding indeed that they can't do very well, and then the first 2 or 3 items that they stumble over, before long their performance tumbles. And that's where bias comes in. The tests themselves are actually pretty accurate when it comes to one group over another. They don't skew one way or another. Our scientific basis for approaching testing, I think, is pretty robust enough to do what we can to prevent that from happening. But we can't prevent people's interpretation of the results and how those results may be communicated to someone else. And that's one part of it. And the other part of it is, what do I do with those interpretation of results when they're communicated to me? So that gives you a little bit of an idea of the background behind this issue of bias, how it comes into play when we're talking about testing.